Hello, this is Kate Mackenzie and welcome to my podcast. Today I'm interviewing my aunt, Jose Fonseca, who set up Model Swan, the longest running, most successful models agency in the UK, with her partner April Ducksbury, with 3 models, Marisa, Berenson, Sue Murray and Ingrid Boulting, who were stars of their time. And it was an immediate success. Eileen Ford visited them from America and gave them her blessing. And they just went from strength to strength to strength from that beginning. It was an incredible story, an incredible time in the 60s and the 70s, and then the 80s when they really grew. And this is the story of her journey, how she wanted to be a model, but was told she was too dark, too short. Which might be a different story nowadays, but at that point she couldn't be a model, but she became a model's agent, and she became a very, very successful model's agent. And how also she transitioned from that great success to selling it, to engaging in self-responsibility through doing Vipassana courses every year and looking at her own part in her life in all that she's doing. It's a very interesting story. One of the most interesting aspects I found was the fact that she felt that there's some kind of destiny for all of us. You can't see it at the time, but now looking back, she realizes in some ways she had very little to do with it all. She was riding a wave. It wasn't always a comfortable wave, but she really was riding a wave. In some ways, nothing to do with her, but she's very grateful for the wave. And so I really hope you enjoy this. I really did. And I kind of discovered a lot about her own colour and her own hippiness, because as a child I knew her as this really suited, booted, quite scary looking woman, quite official looking. And I discovered that was because the husband she had at the time demanded those kind of clothes. He wanted that kind of wife. All really fascinating. Her natural sense of self is very colourful Indian clothes. So I hope you enjoy this. I certainly did, and hope you tune in. Thanks. Okay, so hi Joe. Thanks very much for being with me today.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, lovely to be with you. So I just wanted to be with you and have a chance to ask you about your thoughts, your reflections on your career, on your life, and also what means a lot to you, where you've come to that all the things that you feel are important and valuable. But perhaps if I could start with Model Swan.
Right.
And how did that even start? How did that begin? I know you were working for English Boy before you were working for Model Swan. How did you even come to work for English Boy?
Well, you know, what's extraordinary about life is that I've realized now that I'm in my 70s, is that we live in fear and trepidation about how we're going to have our lives. Are we going to be able to live them the way we want to? Are we going to be able to follow our passions, etc., etc.? And looking back, everything was sort of synchronistic in a way. I'd left school with no qualifications. I was the frustration of my parents, who wondered what I was going to do to support myself. Because unlike most parents of the 60s who expected their daughters to get married, my father never did. He just thought I needed to look after myself. And that was really a concern for him. So, you know, after 20, he didn't give me any more money. And so I just had to work. And fashion was my passion. And I'd gone to see Lucy Clayton with my mum when I was about sort of 18. And they said, "You're too dark, you're too short." And so I knew that modeling wasn't an option. But I ended up through a friend who had come to stay in our flat. There were 4 of us in a 1-bedroom flat in Earl's Court. And she came to stay for a week because she had nowhere to live. And she said, "Oh, get you a job at this wig company. And the wig company was, very successful. Everybody wore wigs in the 60s or hair pieces. And he then decided to open a boutique in the King's Road, and he asked me to go and work there, which I did.
What was that called?
And it was called Allsop, Brindle and Boyle. And all the men in those days were wearing beautiful Regency suits. So he invited a tailor from Savile Row to go and work for him in the shop and make these beautiful Regency suits. And while I was working there, Mark Palmer and Calvin Webb and their partner, Trisha Locke, came in and they said, we've opened a modeling agency called English Boy, and we wondered if you'd come and work for us. I said yes, and I went to work for them, not knowing anything about the agency business or the modeling or anything. But I had a good way with people. I was hungry and excited to learn. And I went and worked with them for 2 years. And then they went off on the hippie trail. And I got fired by Alice Pollock, who took over English Boy. Alice Pollock was the partner of Ozzie Clark. And it was a wonderful adventure because in the building where Ozzie and the shop Quorum was on the first mezzanine floor was Brian Jones and his girlfriend living, and then above that was English Boy. And so there was so much going on in that building that was sort of happening in the 60s. And
Was this on King's Road? Where was it?
it was Radnor Walk, which was just off the
Yeah.
King's Road.
Yeah.
So when she fired me, I went home and had a good think about what I was going to do.
Were you upset?
I was upset because I felt that it hadn't been justified, but I think she wanted a new team around her that it was obviously being run by different people. And I'd been working for Mark and Kelvin and Trisha. So
And what were you doing? You were booking young English men. What was English Boy?
English Boy were all the hip friends of Mark Palmer that were sort of hanging around the King's Road in those days. And up until that time, all male models are being sort of chiseled and beefy and very masculine. And these were sort of rather pretty, thin boys that were sort of hippie-ish. And of course, there were girls too, lots of girls.
Did they get lots of work? Was that the fashion at the time, the pretty boys?
Well, it was innovative. It was a change. It was new. It was a new way of looking at fashion. And yes, I mean, it was the first of its kind. And, there was work, but they were a little bit all over the place. There was lots of dope being smoked and a lot of people not turning up. And, it was a bit sort of unprofessional.
Mm.
And as hard as I tried to be professional, it was quite difficult. So when I was fired, Sue Murray, Ingrid Boulting, and Marisa Berenson said they would come with me if I
From
opened
English Boy? From English Boy?
English. Well, no, Sue Murray was with Lucy Clayton, and it was a big deal for her to leave because she was a very established model. She was with a proper agency, and for her to leave and come and support me was the biggest, I mean, gift she could have given me. Marisa Berenson was based in Paris and she was very established, and Ingrid Boulting was an actress come model, but based in London at that time. But all three of them were, pretty well known and very successful. So for them to come and join me was such a gift. I'd never have been able to start Models One without them.
You were backed up. You were properly backed up.
I was properly backed up. And the following week, after being fired, I went back to help them out, models at English Boy, and happened to talk to April, who I'd never met. She worked for a photographer called David Anthony, and she had also left, she was leaving David. And she asked me what I was going to do. I said, well, I was going to open my own agency. And she said, are you looking for a partner? And I said, well, I hadn't thought about it. So she said, well, should we have a coffee? So I went to meet her. We had a coffee. We were totally different people,
What
not
was
just
that
to look at.
difference? Yeah, what was the difference?
I was sort of in my hippie phase and, you know, very sort of chilled. And she was very buttoned up and pearls and twin set and tight skirt. She was quite a bit older than me and had had a very exciting life already. And I thought, well, why not? You know, we got on, and I had nothing to lose. She had nothing to lose. So we opened in my flat, or the flat I shared with Ingrid Boulting in the King's Road in November 1968.
And what happened?
Well, it was a success right from the beginning. I mean, nothing. We borrowed £700 to open the agency
Who did you borrow it from?
from April's partner. And we paid it back within 6 months. And it went from strength to strength. I mean, it was incredible. We were so blessed. It was just everything flowed, everything worked.
Was there
You
something
know,
around the beginning? Eileen Ford also got interested in you from the very start. Was there something around that?
yes, once we opened, she came to see us within our first year and was very interested because Stu Murray was represented by her.
Uh-huh.
Um, so she came, she was very encouraging, and she said she would send us models. We said we'd send her models. And, you know, she invited us to the collections in Rome. And so, I mean, everything went better than we could have ever imagined.
And so once you had those three models and you had the blessing from Eileen Ford and you had the startup, did that mean it just immediately expanded and opened?
People just kept coming through our doors, ringing us, you know, wanting to come and be interviewed. I mean, we were just inundated with models that wanted to join us. It was very exciting and very challenging. Um, yes, it was wonderful. Everything was possible. It seemed possible then. And it just went from strength to strength. We moved into an office in Radnor Walk, which was just down the road from Quorum, an English boy. And we stayed there for a number of years before we moved to Fulham Road. And I mean, we were just so lucky. I can't explain it, but I think when things are meant to be, they flow very easily. There are no obstacles in your way.
Mm.
And you know that you've sort of made the right choice because, you know, otherwise it wouldn't have worked.
How was that? Did you find how did people treat you when you're in that flow and everything's happening and you get these three incredibly top models that back you up, so you're fully backed up, you've got this partner who's very businesslike, and Eileen Ford giving you the blessing, so you're, you know, everything's getting ticked, boxes are moving, everything's happening, and everybody wants to be around you. Were you already confident, or did this boost your confidence, or how was that, you know, when you're suddenly in the flow and you're in an empowered position in a way? How was that to be in that position?
Well, I was never very confident, to be honest. I think uh, I I was prepared to work hard. I had I was good with people. Um, I was a good networker. I had a good eye, so I could find models. And but confidence is a funny thing. I'm not sure when you ever feel confident, really. I
Mm.
think confidence in your job is one thing, but confidence in yourself, that comes much later in life when you start to feel comfortable in your skin.
Mm.
I had the confidence that I was able to do the job because it was being confirmed to me by outside forces.
Yeah, yeah. And how was it to be in such a field where things kept changing? So for example, like you said, you know, the 60s type of beauty was one thing, 70s type of beauty was another thing, and if you look at what beauty is now, beauty has kept changing. The idea of beauty, especially in modeling, especially in fashion, especially in high fashion. So what was that like to navigate?
You just go with the flow. The thing is, we adapt to that. I mean, maybe if I'd stayed in the agency business, I would have adapted to what beauty has become now. But I didn't. I left 20 years ago. So I couldn't even imagine that beauty would change as much as it has. But if you look all through the centuries, beauty has changed.
Always.
And it's never nothing is static. Everything is constantly moving and
No,
adapting and evolving.
that's right. That's right. Would you have expected that from being in the 80s, for example, where beauty had a very strong, I mean, all the eras have had strong identities, but would you have imagined that beauty could have changed so much from where you were?
No, but the thing is, I didn't really think about it because I wasn't in it.
Yeah.
Once I left, I'd left.
Yeah.
And now I cannot understand it. There's no way in a million years I could have been in the business. I could go back to it because it's a totally different business.
Yeah.
It's like everything. You have your time in
Yeah.
something, and then when you leave, that time is over and something else takes over.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with your perception of
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
beauty is, or the business is, or
Yeah.
how it's run, and even the technology. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
see anybody, you
No.
don't talk to anybody anymore. Everything's
No.
done on the internet. I
Yeah.
can't imagine that.
Absolutely. And so what was it actually like, in the 60s? And like you said, you had the Beatles and the Stones and all these rock and rollers and even famous criminals or famous all people all night clubbing together. There's all this, and people taking drugs and partying and drinking together. And it sounds like, in some ways it was kind of in some ways a small world where, like you're saying, different to now where everything's bigger and wider. What was that like to be part of those scenes in that time around King's Road and around all those places in London?
Well, it was a very small world in the sense that there were less people around. um, yes, there must have been less people. And also the music industry and the modeling industry and the film industry all seem to um, cross over. Models became actresses, and rock stars wanted to have models on their covers, their album covers. And London wasn't the huge city it is today. It mostly centered in the 60s around the King's Road. And then it moved to different areas, then it was sort of Notting Hill, and then it's been Hoxton, and it's just got bigger and bigger. But at that point, it was very much the King's Road. And also you could just walk in. I could go to an office and make an appointment in the morning and get an appointment that very day. I mean, you can't get appointments with anybody anymore. You can't even speak to them on the telephone. So it was very easy. Everything was much more personal. Everything, you made friends within the business. Um, everybody helped each other. It's it was a much easier way of working, of doing things. The possibilities of meeting somebody that was working as a producer or director, or an editor of a magazine, you could actually go and see them and talk to them about the models you'd like them to book or see. I doubt whether you could do that today.
Mm. So were you aware of the ease that you had, or did it just feel natural at the time?
It was just very natural. It
Yeah.
didn't really seem any
Yeah.
different,
Yeah.
because it wasn't any different.
Yeah.
And it was all beginning. It was the beginning of fashion as it is today. as it was then.
What
Sorry.
does that mean? It was the beginning of fashion as it is today. What does that mean? Do you mean like brands
Well, we
developing?
come out of the 50s, which was pretty staid, and women were wearing corsets and were sort of being chaperoned. They lived at home, or they didn't really have a job, or most women didn't have a job. Um, they got married. And then the 60s, the clothes got loose. People got rid of their very tight undergarments. The magazines were sort of thriving with new ideas. New shops, ready to wear was suddenly available. People had to have their clothes made in the 50s. So it was just a completely different way of living.
So
And
what was that like for you then? If you're at the front, you're at the beginning of such a big change, and what was that like in terms of your background and your parents? Like, did they support you? Were you encouraged in some ways to be so adventurous? Was that from your parents? How did you get to be in that milieu and just flow with it?
well, I couldn't wait to leave home. We had a fairly strict upbringing, and a very strict upbringing, actually. And I couldn't wait to sort of be free from that. And then I was basically on my own to try and make the best that I possibly could. And I think they became very proud of what I had achieved, but they didn't really know how I had gone about it. They didn't show a lot of interest. They were in the countryside. I was in London. Um, so they just knew that I'd open. I mean, I spoke to my father because at one time I wanted to borrow the money from him to open the agency. But he
Did he
was
lend you money to
would have,
open it?
he would have, but
Yeah.
April found the money,
Okay, so
and
he would have supported you. He would have backed you. Yeah.
would have supported me. But they were sort of in the background. They weren't engaged in my day-to-day living.
So what gave you that kind of chutzpah? What gave you that kind of, you know, ability? What would you say? Was there anything from your upbringing, or was it just in a way you were rebellious from such a strict 1950s sort of background that you were able to kind of go in that freedom that the 60s had? Right. Okay. Slate's clear. I'm going to do this. What gave you that? Was there anything from your background that helped you go for it?
Well, I was pretty rebellious, very rebellious actually, oftentimes to my detriment. But also, I had to work and I had to earn money.
What was that about the not being expected to marry? Because that sounds very unusual for a woman to not be expected to marry.
No, it wasn't that he didn't expect me to marry. He didn't think that it was very um, bright to expect somebody else to look after you.
Ah,
So he said you should always be independent. And
ah.
that meant having a career. As a lot of women and girls of my age who came from middle class families, their parents thought they would get married so they didn't have to think about a career. People didn't go to university in those days unless they were doing something like medicine or accountancy or law or science or whatever. Most women just, got little jobs and then got married. But my father expected me to have a career. He wanted me to be independent, totally independent.
Did he say that to you?
Yes, yes. Because
And
he'd often say, when I hadn't done well at school, how are you going to support yourself? What are you going to do?
right, so that explains a lot, doesn't it? That
Yes,
explains some of the impetus to kind of really go for it as a woman in that time, to
yes,
really go for your own business and your own career, because like you said, many women might not have dared even. So
no.
it kind of explains that kind of backup, even though it's expectation. There's also there was some.
The pressure there to sort
Right,
of
right.
succeed,
Yeah.
to make money, to be able to live on my own terms.
And how was that to run a business and also to be part of, like you said, socializing, dressing up, partying? How did you do both? How did you balance that? Or maybe it was just not balanced, but how did you do that? That your working life is your social life. You're actually connected with all these different people in socializing and working, which, like you said, is slightly different nowadays.
Well, I enjoyed the social aspect of it, and I enjoyed the finding of the models. And I was lucky enough to have April, who was not interested in that. She was 12 years older than me, so she was quite happy to stay in the office and do all the administrative work. And since I was the one to find the models and entertain the models and the photographers, I was okay to do it because I had somebody back in the office
So it was
doing.
part of your job. The actual socializing was almost like part of your job. Yeah. So it's that's brilliant, isn't it? So it's kind of actually you two had two roles, like husband and wife in some ways.
Yeah,
You were doing the housekeeping, dinner party, socializing side, and April was looking after the business side. And so the socializing was your job, even though it was also making friends and enjoying that. It was your job.
yes. But we didn't know at the time that we opened the agency. I've just got to switch the heater off, darling. We didn't know at the time that we started the business. I didn't say to her, let's open the business, you do all the administration and I'll do the. We were just so lucky. And it made me realize that we think we're in control of our lives, but in fact, we have no control at all. Life just happens.
Yeah.
And,
When did you come to that? When did you come to that realization that
well, I suppose, when as I've reflected on life, I've seen that basically we don't have any control over anything. We make small moment by moment choices, but really overall, we have no control over really what happens in our lives, actually. You think of the amount of people that train to be something, but then end up doing something totally different.
Yeah.
You know,
Almost like there's a bigger plan and there's a bigger thing, and we're cogs in this bigger plan, that
yeah.
we play our role in this bigger plan, and we don't realize that necessarily till a certain point.
No, I think so. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how was that for you then? Because I know obviously there would have been a lot of power. Maybe you didn't realize it, maybe you did realize it. Did you realize that if the modeling world and the fashion world and the film world and the music world was so connected, you would have had a lot of power, in that sense of power at that time, to be able to talk to producers or music makers or people who were doing all kinds of interesting things. Did you feel powerful? Did you have a sense of feeling connected, or that you could ring certain people if you needed to, or be in touch with them if you wanted to? Did you have a sense of that freedom?
Well, I was as powerful as the models that I represented.
Yeah.
If I had no models that people were interested in, I would have had no power whatsoever, because they wouldn't have been interested in seeing me.
Yeah.
So you're as good as the people you represent, really.
Yeah, makes sense. But you did have models, that people wanted to connect with. So did you feel powerful, or did you feel like, oh, I'm just representing powerful models? How did that impact you, having these kind of models that people wanted to book?
Well, power is a funny thing, because I don't know whether I felt powerful, because there's always a threat that the model could leave.
Of course. Right.
Or your booker could leave.
Right.
Or, as we proceeded over the years, the business became more and more competitive and cutthroat, and people wanted, to fill their agencies with the best models and the best bookers. So, it became a battle to try and keep them, not a battle to keep the models, but, there was always a point where the models could leave and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So you sort of, on the one hand, you do feel that you have a sense of power. Is it power? I'm not sure that it's power, but you have a sense of representing these people, but also it can be swept away at any moment.
So actually, on one level is a flow, and on another level you're on the edge.
Absolutely.
And part of that, a bit like I imagine skydiving or,
Yeah,
windsurfing or anything that's kind of in the flow but also on the edge. You might get 2 minutes of things flying well, and then you might get 2 hours of things not going well. You're kind of like riding all these waves.
absolutely.
Right. And so therefore you don't necessarily get the time to stop and go, oh my goodness, I can ring
No,
a pop star up because they're trying to book certain models for their album. You're just kind of managing all these different edge and flows all the time while
absolutely.
you're in it.
Absolutely. No
Right.
time. There's no time to sit back and think, oh God, I've got it all made. I can do whatever I
No,
want to do.
no.
No way. You're constantly creating, being trying to be innovative, looking after the people you represent, hoping they're happy with your representation. It's a constant process of working and making sure that people are happy with what you're doing for them.
So it's
You know,
quite adrenalized in a way. It was
yes,
quite adrenalized while you
you
were
live
doing
on
it.
your adrenaline really,
Yeah.
and the energy,
Yeah.
you know, that you
Yeah.
have to create to keep things going.
And how was that? How was that? Because, one sense, I know when you've talked about the 60s, there would be these parties where you'd all dress in white and go somewhere in the countryside and wear flowers and be kind of flower power. And the 70s would have another thing, 80s. How was this to manage this kind of, you're running a business and you're having to socialize and then you're partying and being in the flow and then you're having to make sure it all works. How was all that?
Well, the 60s and the 70s were much easier because it was all the businesses were sort of smallish businesses,
Right.
in the sense that they were local, they were English. um, unless you were a rock star and you were playing in America or you model, it was all pretty local. And so therefore it was very creative and not so much about money.
Ah,
All really changed in the 80s.
what happened in the 80s?
In the 80s, it became Mrs. Thatcher really changed everything.
What did
And
she do?
well, she encouraged people to buy their own houses. She broke the unions. It was a time of neoliberalism. Um, Everybody wanted to have a business. Suddenly, we as agents were able to make a bit more money because we were not only charging 20% to the model, but also 20% to the client, which had been unheard of. And on 20% from the model, you make a living, but there's not much more. It's pretty limiting, especially because most of the work was based in London. It was only in the 80s that the contracts started coming to London, other than, before that they were just in New York, maybe Milan and Paris, but not London.
Do you mean fashion contracts or perfume contracts? What kind of
Any
contract?
contracts, contracts for commercials and advertising. And this was before they started using celebrities, models were being used. So, once that started, there was serious money to be made in the
What
industry.
what changed? How did that change come about that you charged the client? How did that come?
Well, and Europe and America had been charging 40% anyway since we opened. And it was illegal to charge two sources commission. But there was a way that was found by the Model Association in the mid 80s to charge 20% to the client and 20% to the model. So that meant you were getting double. Plus, the contracts started coming to the UK. So, you were then, it was possible for the models to make serious money and also for us to make serious money. So that changed the whole business completely. That's really when it got very, very stressful.
Ah, because what happened? What happened then? When that change came in, what happened?
Well, more and more people were opening agencies,
Oh, so you had more competition then?
more competition. It became totally much more cutthroat. Um, it just changed the business completely. And it was less fun for me. I found it less fun. It was very nice making more money. And it was the first time I was able to get a flat and um, buy a flat. But it became very stressful. It became very, um, yes, very cutthroat, really. The everybody wanted to have a business, which is fair. Like everybody wanted to own their house, which is fair. But it just made it very difficult to hang on to what you'd got.
Ah, right. It's like there was a race for everybody to get into
So
the school.
yeah. So then I sort of, rather than looking after the models, I ended up looking after the staff, making sure the staff were happy. So, it changed. And my love of the business was really looking after the models, getting them going, helping them realize their dreams. And then it changed to me really just looking after the staff and making sure they were happy. So the whole business for me changed. It was just different. As you were saying, businesses evolve the whole time.
And
Um,
and
beauty,
yeah, sorry, carry on.
and beauty evolves, and the sort of models that are wanted or in demand evolve and change.
And would you say, so obviously your dad demanded of you that you have a career, and what did your mum expect you to do things, or was your mum involved in any of this to do with your career?
No, she would have been very happy for me to go home and get a job locally.
Mm.
She would have liked that. And of course, no, I wanted to be in London. I'd been at school in London. I hadn't lived in Wales for a very long time. So I didn't really of course, I felt a connection with it, but, I wanted to be in the city. I wanted to be where it was all happening. I couldn't imagine a million years moving back to our little town, you
So
know,
it made sense to you to be in London.
absolutely.
But was your mum an influence because she loved fashion? Was she an influence?
Yes, I think she was an influence in, me thinking about clothes and style, and which came from her. Um, yes, I think your parents have a huge influence on you, you know, even if you're not aware of it. You're absorbing their energy, their taste, their thoughts, their beliefs.
And did you feel that they were proud of you as you were growing?
Yes, I did. I felt my father couldn't believe that I'd actually been able to start a business, run a business, and keep it going. You
Mm,
know,
mm.
I think he was very proud of what I'd achieved.
And what were significant moments? So obviously that was a very significant moment that you had the three models, Marisa Berenson and Sue Murray and Ingrid Boulting. That was a very significant moment. But you've had other many significant models and many significant modeling moments. What would you say were significant moments?
Well, we used to do searches. We'd go on scouting trips, and we would go to the collections. We'd go to Rome, and we'd go to New York, and we'd go to Paris. And we were always discovering really wonderful, fabulous girls that would come and work in London, or our girls would go and work there. And, just traveling to those countries always boosted one's energy, because when you stay in one place, you sort of get bogged down with the mundanity of your life and your job and then you travel and you see the exciting things that are happening elsewhere, and that boosts your energy and your creativity, and it gives you the opportunity to come back with fresh ideas,
Mm.
new fabulous uh, girls that want to spend time in London, and and it was constantly changing. That's what was so exciting about it.
And so does it feel like there are certain moments, like you had Jerry Hall, you were an agent for Jerry Hall, or Iman would come over, or Yasmin Le Bon? Are there certain models that represent certain times for you as well?
Well, yes, I remember seeing Jerry, I think in Vogue, I think it was Parkinson's pictures of her. And and I had a friend who was working for Brian Ferry, and I showed her the picture, and she said, "Oh, I know he'd like her for the cover of his album." So I flew to Rome to see if I could represent Jerry, and she said yes, and she said she'd come to London, and she came to London and did the album cover for Brian Ferry, and then ended up staying in London. And so, there were lots of cases like that. The same with Iman. She came and spent a lot of time in London because she sort of loved London, and I don't think she'd met Bowie then, she met Bowie later on. But, there were so many, God, so many interesting, wonderful women that came and spent time in London, because they just loved the energy of London. Um, and also, it was an international business, so they could really work anywhere and travel anywhere. So that was what was exciting about it.
And what makes a good model? Because obviously, there's many beautiful women, but not all beautiful women manage to have a big career. And you've worked with women who've managed to create very big careers and have many other opportunities, including, like you said, acting or developing businesses alongside. What helps a model kind of grow that for themselves? Rachel Weisz was one of your models, for example. You've had many models who were doing degrees at the same time, or been doing all kinds of different things.
Well, I think they've got to be professional, they have to be hungry, they have to learn to manage themselves because they are managing themselves. The agent only helps to a certain degree. They have to become business women, and they have to have wonderful personalities because people have to like having them around. They've got to be exceedingly photogenic and flexible because they have to go outside in the freezing cold with bikinis or swim in a lake or, do unbelievable things that most people wouldn't find very funny. So, what's demanded of them is a lot. And if they're successful at it, they can be successful at anything. Really, that's what
Mm.
I found.
So
And
it's
we had
yeah.
girls that went on to do, you know, degrees in psychiatry, to become nurses, to run their own businesses, to become actresses, to become television presenters. I mean, you name it, they could do it.
Mm. and
So,
and
yeah.
what about the, as Models One now sometimes does these days where they give the models training in accountancy or skincare or exercise or self-awareness. Sometimes they give, because they discovered that a lot of the Swedish models and the Australian models were much more confident. So they went, Hannah, one of the bookers from New Faces, went to Sweden to go and to find out why was some of the Australian models and the Swedish models more confident. And they discovered they were giving them coaching around certain areas of their lives, and they were traveling with a different framework. And what they were also saying is that sometimes the female-led models agencies are sometimes thinking about that, about
Yeah.
how to train the girls. And a lot of model agencies are run by men, and I don't know if they're thinking like that about looking after the girls in the same way. I don't know if you have thoughts on that. Being you were a female-run model agency, was there that thought about protecting them and helping them to grow in that sense of?
Yes, yes. I think um, me personally, when we opened the agency, Most of the agencies were run by women and gay men. Um, I am sure that there are some problems with heterosexual men running agencies, um, only because of the temptation of beautiful, beautiful women. So, uh, yeah, I think in a way women should look after women, to be honest. I'm not saying that men can't play a part, but they can play a limited part. But you know, the business is what it is. Who am I to say that men shouldn't do it? But they need to be very they need to be men with a special caliber
Mm.
and not have ulterior motives to
Mm.
use the women in a unacceptable manner.
Were you able to guide, because obviously a lot of models are very young, were you able to guide them in that sense of taking care around situations?
Well, you're limited again in how much influence you can have over them. You know, you see them like 2 or 3 times a week when they come into the office, or you speak to them on the phone, maybe on a daily basis, but they've got to go and present themselves to, I think, since the Me Too um, episode, things have changed a lot. And I think um, maybe they are safer now than they've ever been, and more aware than they've ever been. But, you know, as I haven't been in the business for 20 years, I can't really tell you that. But I would imagine it's a much safer business now than it was.
Mm. So actually, all these changes in the last couple of years, with you know with the Me Too, with the influence of looking at race, and even now, you know, I imagine looking at all kinds of intersectionality and diversity. And you know, for example, people brain looking at people on the spectrum having autism and all these different things that all these businesses like will be people will hopefully becoming more aware and more understanding. Yeah.
More aware and more inclusive and more, you know, sort of understanding. And you know, I think it's brilliant the way things have changed. You know, I never would have imagined, but it's wonderful. You know, I think Models One now have they've got a curved vision for larger ladies, larger girls. They've got a huge volume of black and brown boys and girls. But you know, it's much more inclusive, and people want it to be more inclusive. So I think that can only be a good thing.
And do you think there's any link with fashion and modeling and eating issues? You know, is there a link, or is that to do with people's own trauma and upbringing? Do you feel there's any links with that? I mean, you especially coming from the 60s with that, you know, that 60s look of that twiggy look, you know, that very thin look. Do you think there's any link with that?
Um, well, I think in the 60s, when I was growing up, there were no fast foods, none whatsoever. They didn't exist. And parents, I think most parents cooked, mothers cooked, and most mothers were home mothers. And so it was a very, very different life. And I remember most people being very slim. I wasn't aware of people being, of course, there were people that were more weighty than others, but I wasn't aware of people being overweight in the sense of you talk about overweight now, if there is such a thing as overweight. Um, I think with the advent of fast foods and parents going out to work and divorce and kids being very unhappy, I think eating disorders developed as the years went on.
Mm.
And I don't necessarily put that down to modeling. I
Mm.
think, you know, I've never met anybody, and I don't know whether this is allowed, if I'm allowed to say this, but I've never met anybody that wanted to be overweight. I spent a lot of my life always trying to lose weight and wanting to be thin. And the reason for wanting to be thin was because I feel healthier. I like myself better when I'm thinner, and I think it's normal. For me, it's a normal thing.
Mm.
If you're happy being overweight, well, that's great. But for me, I wasn't happy being overweight. And where in the modeling world, clothes are a certain size, they can't make clothes for everybody. So the average size was 10, and the models had to be tall because the camera makes you look shorter and fatter. So, and the clothes look better on tall people. So that was that's how it was done. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but it worked for a long time, and now things have changed. And I suppose that in every show now they have an area for larger women.
So
But
is it different now? Is there less pressure on models to be a certain weight if there's room for the larger model? Is it different now?
well, I think there is, again, you'd have to speak to somebody who's working in the business now. But I would imagine that the clothes are still a size 10, and you still have to be 5'9" plus to wear them, but they would also be within that fashion show, um, maybe clothes for larger women.
Mm. And what about as well black model agencies? So I understand there was a black model agency in the 70s. Do you know about
Yes,
that?
yes, I can't remember what it was
Was
called.
it called Black
There was,
Boy? Was it called
oh,
Black Girl? Was it called?
I can't remember what it was called, darling. I
Yeah.
can't remember. But I
So
mean, there was an agency for black models. But I mean, we did have some black models, but they were in the 70s, but they came from America.
yeah.
And there were certainly a few black models with English Boy in the 60s. We had a lovely girl called Kelly, and then there was Doña Luna. Um, but they were few and far between, and I suppose that was because the models represent the country that they live in. And I don't know what percentage of England was black and brown at that time, but maybe nothing like it is now. And I mean, when I went to see Lucy Clayton, they said I was too dark and I was too short. So the fact that I was too dark meant that, I wasn't representative of the actual population.
Mm,
So, it has changed enormously,
mm,
enormously.
mm. And then after you left Models One, you sold Models One. What was that like?
Well, I couldn't wait to get out. I couldn't wait to leave. I had felt like I'd done it. It was 35 years, and I didn't really want to do it any longer. And I thought I would be relieved, which I was. But then we were in India when we heard that the agency had been sold. And the day after we heard it was sold, I came out in shingles. And then
Oh,
when I came back, I went into a big depression because
oh,
I think when you have big changes in your life, you don't know how those changes are going to impact on you.
yeah,
So I went back to therapy to help me deal with the change. And, after a while, I was fine. But it was a big loss because I didn't have children. Models One was like my family. And from one day to the next, that had gone.
yeah,
So, as much as I wanted it, I had no idea what it would be like without it.
yeah. So it's really interesting, isn't it? It was, even though you wanted to let go, the let go was really harsh. It was harsh on you and harsh on your body. Yeah.
It was harsh on me once I'd let go. The problem is we never know really what we want. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm glad we did. I'm glad I did it but I had no idea the consequences of what it would be like doing it. And I think that goes for all of us. The grass always seems greener somewhere else,
Yeah.
but it never really is.
And then you engaged hugely in Vipassana meditation, and you engage in that hugely every year. What's that like?
So Vipassana in 1990, I sort of had a crisis, and I wasn't that happy in my marriage, and I was definitely unhappy in my business. And so I decided to go to India and work at Mother Teresa during my um, Christmas holidays to sort of get some perspective in my life. And I found that amazing. And I really, really, it did me a lot of good. And while I was there, I met a girl and she said, "You must do Vipassana. And there is a center in London, and I'm sure that you will find it." And when I came back, I tried. I looked in Yellow Pages, couldn't find it. In those days, it was all in the directory. And I ended up sitting at a dinner party in Sussex next to a man who it turned out was one of the trustees of the Vipassana Meditation Trust. So there again, synchronicity. You couldn't really make it up. And I booked to go. Um, it was pretty scary. In fact, I told my sister about it, and she said, "Oh, I'll go." And she went first. And then she called me when she came out and she said, "Oh, you will love it. You'll love it. You'll do it easily." So I went to do it, and I did. And that was really when I realized that I couldn't just walk out of my marriage. I couldn't just walk out of my business. That, the problems that I had were my problems. It wasn't the business, it wasn't my husband. And it gave me an insight into myself that I'd never had before.
Mm.
And when I went back to the office, I said to everybody, if you want to do a 10-day Vipassana, I will give you the 10 days on top of your holiday.
Mm.
But one other person did it, and she was a secretary of ours, and she was about to leave her husband for somebody else. And I said, "Before you do that, please just go and do the retreat." Anyway, she went. When she came out, she left us, and she left the person she was having an affair with, went back to her husband, and had another child.
Wow.
So it just makes you see life very clearly and sees your part in it.
Wow.
And it was very instrumental in my growth.
And you do it every year. You do
I
it
do.
every year. And how is that for you? How many times a year do you do it each year? And how is
I
that
have
to do
done
it?
it every year. I haven't done it this year, but I have done it every single year and sometimes twice a year. And it's been amazing for me. Amazing.
What's it
It's
done for
hard.
you? Yeah.
Um, it grounds me. It helps me. It's like a muscle. If you're a tennis player, or if you're a swimmer, or if you're a backgammon player, you have to practice. And if you don't practice, you're you you can't keep up your ability. And meditation is the same, because this is a practice that you're learning, and you're learning to see yourself as and life as it is, not as you would like it to be.
Mm.
And you need to, if you're going to do it, you have to keep putting that into practice. And that's the reason for going back, to see life as it is, not as I would like it to be.
Mm.
Because otherwise you slip back into old patterns of expecting this and expecting that, and not seeing life realistically.
Mm. And if you would could go back, with all your how you've grown with your Vipassana and your business and everything that's happened to you and how you see things now, how you reflect now, what would you say to your younger self if you could? What guidance would you give your younger self? now knowing what you know?
I think, to try and not be so hard on yourself,
Mm,
to try and, to have more belief that things will work out.
mm,
In your darkest moments, thinking, things can't get any worse.
mm,
And then you realize that, it's just a moment in time and things will change and things will get better.
mm.
And to keep positive and to find a practice that you can use to help you get through the dark times, really. I mean, what's so wonderful about life now is that everything is available and it's talked about. Mental health is talked about, um, therapy is talked about, um, doing yoga, doing anything you want to help you get through the bad times in your life is available,
It's
as you yourself
beautiful,
know.
beautiful. So if you could offer thoughts to young people who might be listening, or not young people, any age people, what could you say?
I would say that anything people want, they can achieve. It might not be exactly what they want, but it'll certainly be in the sphere of what they want. Like I wanted to be a model, but that wasn't possible for me. I wasn't right. But I was able to get into the business in another way. And I really and truly believe that if you have a good work ethic, um, and if you have a dream, and can hold on to that dream and then let it go and just work towards it, life will deliver unbelievable things.
And did you have a sense, did you have mentors, did you have guides, did you have a sense of being guided on your way, or did you just follow your instincts?
Well, I had a wonderful elocution mistress when I was at school, and I went to live with her for about 6 months after school because I can't remember why, but anyway, I went to live with her, and she was a bit of a white witch. And she used to say to me, just visualize what you want and then let it go, but hold the image and it will manifest. And that was a very long time ago. And you know, there are people out there like Louise Hay, like Florence Scovel Shinn, all sorts of people who say exactly the same thing. And just believe in yourself and hold the visualization of what you would like, and then just work, and everything will come right. Everything will. I know it. I've seen it for myself.
Wow, that's awesome. And that's such a beautiful message. Well, thank you so, so much for spending this time with me. It was so enlightening and interesting and reflective and enriching as well.
Thank
And maybe one last little thing: clothing, fashion, looking good, beauty is obviously a passion for you. How is that for you? I often think when I see you, I think of a garden. You are full of color and always have been someone that looks beautiful. So what is that for you? Is that like an art form? Is that a meditation? Is that like, you think about that and put yourself together with jewelry or colors? Or do you see what I'm saying? How is
you. Yes.
fashion for you now, or always been maybe?
So fashion in a way for me has changed in the sense that when I was very young, I loved all the hippie clothes. I loved them. I loved the color, the floaty dresses, the flowers, the sort of romanticism of them. And then in the mid 70s, I got involved with a guy and ended up marrying him who wanted me to wear fashion. So I ended up wearing suits and trouser suits and very straight clothes, which actually never really felt right for me. But I did it for him. And the minute we broke up, I went back to my the clothes that I love. But only wore black. During the time I was working, I wore black. And if you notice in fashion, you'll see fashion editors, models, most of them are all wearing black. And I think black looks wonderful on young people. It's also an anonymous color. And so you can have a few very nice pieces, and you don't have to think too much about it when you get up in the morning and you've got to dress quickly. And black seems to look good everywhere. Once I got out of the business and my love of India, I decided I was never going to wear black again. So I went back to color. It cheers me up. It makes me happy. And I found my own style, back to the sort of floaty, hippie, colorful clothes that I now love. And I think everybody's got to find um, their own things, their own clothes, their own accessories, the things that make them feel good, the things that make them feel happy, and the things that make them feel like they are rather lovely.
So you sound like you're yourself.
Yeah, I think clothes are a sort of, in a way, another expression of yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And so if you were just going to say one last little message to people from your experience, a little message would be
Try whatever you want to, try
yeah,
anything,
yeah,
never give up, just keep trying.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jose Fonseca. This was absolutely delightful and lovely and much, much appreciated.
Thank you, Kate, for
Yeah.
giving the time and allowing me to express myself. That was really lovely.
Oh, so lovely. That's so lovely. That's delightful, gorgeous. So that was Jose Fonseca, the starter and creator of Model Swan, with April Ducksbury, talking about her life, how it was to be in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and then how it is to even move and change and move on from a business like that and then grow another part of you, another self-reflective part, a self-responsible part, and how that is, to move away from the outside world to an internal world, to explore that, and also to really discover who you are and what means something to you, and also to notice that you can be of your time. So something like beauty, modelling, the time she was in had a certain flavour, which is completely different now. So we are of our time, we ride the waves of our time, and do we have anything to do with that, or do we just show up for that? And how does that work? I thought this was really interesting, and I think it's a great idea to interview your relatives, I have to say. You find out something very different than just having a little chin wag with them. So I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly did, and please tune in for more shows. Thanks.